Welcome back, Chapter 14. Summer Hill, Virginia, 1970. Olivia put the dishcloth into the big porcelain sink and looked out the window. It was beautiful on the grounds of the old plantation, but when you were as angry as she was, nothing looked good. Behind her at the kitchen table were Uncle Freddie, Mr. Gates, and the two little kids. Uncle Freddie's wheelchair was beside Mr. Gates' old cane back seat, and the children's leg dangled off the bench. They were eating the Campbell's soup and grilled cheese sandwiches she had fixed for lunch. Again. Olivia knew she should get her anger under control, but at the moment, life seemed too unfair for her to think clearly. Everything had been so perfect. She had Broadway and a future that held nothing but promise. Turning, she looked at the four of them, their heads down and eating in silence. Damnation! How did she get out of this job? How did she get out of this job? She was totally unsuited for it. She'd never cooked much and wasn't interested in learning how. These men and the children, especially little Ace, deserved better. Last night, she called around and found an opening at Abigail's dress shop. If she could find a replacement here, she could have that job. Olivia looked at Uncle Freddie's bent head. He was an old man and she didn't want to hurt him. Beside him was his lifelong companion, Mr. Gates. Why didn't I see that coming? The two men often told how they'd been born on the same day. And that makes us twins, they'd say, and laugh every time. Uncle Freddie was blond and fair-skinned. Mr. Gates was African American. Same birthday, but very different worlds, and everyone in Summerhill knew the story. Frederick Ethan Taddington had been the youngest of four sons born to an old, rich, hard-working, humorless family in Philadelphia. On his 21st birthday, his father did what he'd done to each of his children. He asked Freddie what he most wanted. His older brothers had each said a variation of own the world. Their father had set them up with businesses they could rule. But young Freddie, handsome to the point of prettiness and beloved by them all, said he wanted Tatwell, the plantation in Virginia that the family still owned. The family's ownership in the southern state was still an embarrassment to them, not because of the humanity involved, but because they'd been on the side that had lost a war. Gladly, for his father had run out of businesses to give away, he turned over the decaying plantation to his son, along with the money needed to bring it back to life. Freddie had always been a happy person, but on his 23rd birthday, his joy was severely tested. He had 3 glasses of champagne as he toasted the good that was his life. Then he mounted his horse and decided to see if he could jump over a hay wagon. Everyone begged him not to do it. He made it over the wagon, but just as his horse hit the ground, one of the barn cats ran past. Rather than hurt the creature, Freddie jerked the reins to the right. The horse tried to turn, but couldn't. Freddie went flying off and hit the old stone well in the small of his back. He was paralyzed from the waist down. His beautiful fiancée left him, and his family ordered him to return to Philadelphia. But Freddie stayed where he was, and he never lost his love of life. About a year after the accident, after he'd very kindly fired 3 highly qualified men his family had hired to help him, a tall, thin African young man came by looking for work. He glanced at the entry gates and said his name was Gates. Just the one name. Freddie hired him, added the Mr. to his name, and 2 weeks later, they were inseparable companions. Oh, okay. I'll take that back. Over the many years, Uncle Freddie, as he became known to everyone, had helped a lot of people. He gave them jobs on the old plantation that seemed to devour money, and he listened to them. In fact, he lived by the belief that most problems could be fixed by people genuinely listening to each other. He developed contacts in law enforcement, social services with clergies. He learned who to ask for help with any problem. The only aspect of his life where he wasn't successful was in keeping a housekeeper cook. No one lasted very long. The house was too big, there were too many mouths to feed, etc., etc. The longest anyone had lasted was 3 years. That was Margaret, and she had stayed because Uncle Freddie gave her the summers off. 3 years ago, Uncle Freddie's distant cousin William, his wife Nina, and their 2-year-old daughter Ruth came for the summer. Bill taught physics at the Eastern College and Nina was a housewife. The idea was that for the whole summer, Bill would work with some local boys in cleaning up the acres around the old house and tending the orchid and vegetable garden. Nina would cook, can, and freeze anything that grew. In the fall, they go back east and Margaret would return from her sister's place in Alabama to a pantry full of food that she didn't have to prepare. It had all worked perfectly for about a month. Then Summer Hill's Dr. Everett Chapman came to check on Uncle Freddie. His wife had some church meeting, so the doctor took his 2-year-old son Cal with him. Nina said he'd watch the kids so the men could visit. The children disappeared. They just plain vanished. Half the town joined in the search for them. After 8 hours of looking and no sign of the children, the families, the entire town, were sick with worry. But then the kids came down from the attic, dirty and covered in cobwebs. They were hungry. That night, there were some serious lectures and threats given to the children, but they made no difference. The next day, when young Kyle saw Mr. Gates' red truck go by, he sneaked out of the house. The children climbed in the back and hid behind the bags of cracked corn. His parents found him at Tatwell with Ruth. "Let him stay," Uncle Freddie said. Mrs. Chapman, who was pregnant and feeling awful, agreed that Kyle could stay for 2 nights. When she lost the baby, she was so depressed and weak that she went to Tennessee to stay with her mother for what came to be the rest of the summer. Kyle moved into one of the many bedrooms at Tatwell so his father would be free to take care of the medical needs of the town. The next summer, Kyle's parents were trying for another baby, and after the boy sneaked off 3 times in 2 days, they agreed to let him stay at Tatwell. That was the summer Ruth said that from now on she was to be called Princess Coletta, and Kyle was Ace. Her title was shortened to Letty, and the name stuck. This was the 3rd year the children were spending the summer together at Tatwell. Letty stayed with her parents in what had once been the old kitchen, while Ace had his own room upstairs in the big house. On the surface, this summer looked like the others, but 3 weeks ago, Nina had slipped on the bathtub and broken her right forearm. She couldn't do the huge amount of cooking that she usually did in the summer. She couldn't tend the big vegetable gardens and put up all those quarts of beans and tomatoes or make gallons of applesauce for the winter. And if all that prepared food wasn't waiting for Margaret when she got back, she just might stay in Alabama. Then what would the men do? But what had really changed was that little Ace's mother was dying of ovarian cancer. When Olivia was told this, she knew she couldn't deal with such grief. It wasn't something she knew about. Mr. Gates said she should just be kind to the children, but yesterday, the kids had run through the clean sheets hanging on a line and knocked half of them into the dirt. She'd seen the girls wearing her favorite silk scarf, which meant that the children had been in her bedroom going through her things. Olivia asked Uncle Freddie for a key to the lock on her bedroom door, but he laughed. None of the doors had been locked in a century or more. "Maybe not since the Yankees came through here," Mr. Gates said, and the 2 old men had laughed together. All in all, the 3 days she'd been at Tatwell were more than she could handle. Bratty kids, old men who found everything amusing, trying to cook, something she had no aptitude for, and having no contact with the world of theater overwhelmed her, drained her. "Better save a can of soup for Kit," Mr. Gates said without looking up. It took Olivia a moment to realize that he was talking to her. Who was that? Her frown deepened. If it was another person for her to take care of, she might start screaming. The kids came out of their food trance. "He's tall," Letty said. "He's strong," Ace said. Olivia narrowed her eyes at Uncle Freddie. "Who is this?" "He," Uncle Freddie swallowed. He's from Maine, the son of a relative on my mother's side. His father called me and said young Kit needed a place to spend the summer. He didn't have the courage to admit what he'd done. Olivia put her hands on her hips and went towards him. With him in a wheelchair, she was a great deal taller than he was. Summer, you have added a man to my workload without asking me? Well, Mr. Gates said, at 19, he's hardly 19. Olivia nearly shouted. You want me to take care of a 19-year-old boy? Do you have any idea how much they eat? I'll be cooking in vets, roasting whole turkeys for lunch. I'll have to. She took a breath. I'm not going to do it, she said to the two old men. I'm going to go to work for Abigail Harding at her dress shop. The children had stopped chewing and were looking from one adult to another, their eyes wide. This was the kind of grown-up drama they usually weren't allowed to hear. Uncle Freddie twisted around to look out the screen door. There he is now. That boy can work, Mr. Gates said. He didn't get here until 1 a.m. He glanced up at Olivia. I guess you slept through his arrival, but then Ace and I were trying to be quiet, out of respect for you, Livy. He looked back at Uncle Freddie, and the boy was up before daylight. He took a hand sickle to those old briars at the back. I've been meaning to do that for about 10 years. Bill said he'd never seen a harder worker than that kid, Uncle Freddie said. Olivia knew the old codgers were trying to coax her into staying, but it wasn't going to work. She glared at them. I was told I was to cook for 2 people, that's all. But half of Summerhill plops down in this kitchen, and I'm supposed to serve them. And now you're dumping a teenage boy on me? Have you 2 thought about his being around the children? He'll have girls here and marijuana. It's what all the kids do now. With each word, the children's eyes got wider. They expected that at any moment someone would tell them to leave, but no one did. You have to tell him, Uncle Freddie said to her. Yes, you have to tell Kit too. Mr. Gates waved his hand. Tell him to eat somewhere else or you're leaving. I'm sure he'll understand. Olivia knew they were up to something, but she didn't know what. Maybe they thought that she wouldn't have the courage to stand up for herself. Or heaven help her. Maybe they thought that at 22, she was the same age as the boy. With determination in her eyes, she went to the screen door and flung it open. She was ready to confront the kid, tell him he'd have to find somewhere else to eat. He was, as Letty said, tall, over 6 feet, and he was wearing next to nothing. The upper half of him was nude, while an old pair of kayaks hung low on his hips. She could see the V shape that moved downward. The pants legs had been cut off so shorts they barely covered his backside. I'm trying to picture that. He was at the old water pump, soaping his naked chest, running his long-fingered hands over his body and through his thick black hair. She stood in the doorway, unable to move, as he raised a bucket of water over his head and poured it over his body. She watched the rivets make their way down. His body, Olivia thought, or rather felt. She'd had no idea the human body could look like that, lean and muscular with curves and planes that moved when he did. And his stomach. Muscles divided each side like rows for planting. He had arms like sculpture, legs with heavy thighs, calves like tree branches. The tiny bit of clothing he was wearing hung very low. She could see his hip bones. Never in her life had she seen anything as beautiful as that man's body. She didn't realize it, but she took a step back. Even though she was some distance from him, it was as though she could feel the raw, sexual heat of him. He was like the inner circle of a volcano, and he was drawing her to him, pulling her. When he bent to refill the bucket at the pump, she saw the muscles in his back. They were moving about, rippling. His glorious skin, seemingly acres of it, was beginning to brown in the summer sun. The sight of him was making her mouth and her fingertips ache, the center of her pulsating. Without blinking, she took another step back, then another. The door stayed open and she could see him as he poured a second bucket of water over that beautiful, divine body. Behind her, the old men were working hard to contain their laughter. Ace started to ask what was wrong with Livy, but the look Mr. Gate gave him shut him up. Ace looked at Letty, his eyes saying, "This is getting more exciting by the minute." She nodded in understanding. Yes. Uncle Freddie was the one who saw the wooden truck on the floor. It was in Olivia's backward path. With many years' experience in a wheelchair, he whipped it around so he could bend down and grab the truck. He tossed it to Mr. Gates, then turned the chair just before Olivia would have stepped on him. Mr. Gates put the truck on the table, but he never took his eyes off Olivia. She only stopped moving when her back was against the far wall of the kitchen. Straight ahead, through the open door, Kit was shaking water off his nearly nude body. He ran his hands through his thick hair, flinging droplets into the sunlight. Olivia's heart was pounding, her breath coming fast and hard. Had a cyclone torn through the kitchen at that moment, she wouldn't have noticed. It wasn't until Kit stepped out of sight that she began to remember where she was. When she did come back to reality, it was the precision of a military general. She turned toward the four people at the table, ignored the smirks on the old men, and looked at Letty. "Go tell him lunch will be served in 30 minutes. Woo, child. She looked at Ace. "Get me 4 zucchinis from the garden." The children didn't move. "We just had lunch," Letty said. "What zoo?" "I like the tigers best," Ace said. "We're going to have a second lunch." Olivia started grabbing the half full dishes off the table. "And before you ask, you did not have a first one. Zucchinis are those green plants you two use for space guns. Now go." The kids jumped up and ran to the door. "And keep him busy," Olivia added. Letty paused in the doorway. "What can he do?" "Anything," Olivia said under her breath, then louder. "Be yourselves. That should occupy him for an hour or so." Excuse me. Olivia looked back at the men whose expression were smug. They may as well have tattooed it, "I told you so," across their foreheads. "One word, and I'll say you've already eaten." Instantly, their faces went into angelic repose. "What can we do to help?" Mr. Gates asked. Olivia slapped a couple of old cutting boards on the table, 2 knives and a pile of onions and potatoes. "Peel and chop," she ordered, "and do it quickly. No storytelling about the good old days." The men didn't reply, just began cutting. Olivia knew she was being ridiculous, absurd even, absorbed, you know the word. But she had no excuse for her actions except the ringing in her ears, the vibration of her body, the scrambling eggs that were her brain. It was as though something had gone off inside her. An alarm. No, more like a bomb. She was at the kitchen window, frantically scraping carrots. Behind her were the old men, and their silence filled the room. Usually they were occupied themselves by laughing at the world, but right now she could feel them looking across the table and wiggling their eyebrows. Olivia would like to be aloof from what she was feeling, to be above it, but then she looked out the window and saw him. The kids, true to form, were keeping him occupied by pestering him. Ace had tossed 6 zucchinis at the back door, 3 of them broken in half. Then he'd run back to be with Letty. She was the talker, while Ace was all action. Letty had bombarded the tall young man with 1,000 questions never giving him time to answer. He was looking down at her with a smile of amusement. In Olivia's first look at him, she never noticed his face. He could have 3 eyes for all she'd seen, but now, when she saw his face, aristocrat was the word that came to her. Sharp cheekbones, eyes that weren't round and open, but secretive as though he didn't want people to see what was in his mind. His nose was large, hawk-like. All in all, Olivia could imagine him in a full-length portrait wearing the robes of the nobleman. In a play, he'd be the king. Olivia picked up the zucchini. What was it her mother did with him? She wished she paid more attention to what went on in the kitchen. There was a cut-up chicken in the fridge. She meant to use it tonight, but she grabbed the chicken, threw it in a bowl with flour and lots of pepper, and heated a deep skillet full of oil. She could bread the zucchini and fry it. Too southern, she thought. This guy was a Yankee, so he'd probably be disdainful of all things from the South. Tomatoes, Uncle Freddie said. Olivia didn't at first hear him. Tomatoes, Mr. Gates said louder. This morning, I saw Kit break off a ripe one and eat it like an apple. He said they were the best he'd ever tasted. Olivia handed him a big enamel bowl. You can go get some. I'll slice them. Mr. Gates put his hand on his back. Wait a minute. Mr. Gates put his hand to his back. My sciatic, excuse me. My sciatic has been bothering me a lot today. Livy, I think you should go get them. For a moment, she blinked at the man. Go outside? Near him? She glanced down at her dress. It was old and had been washed many times. There was no reason to put on her New York clothes when all she saw were old men and kids. On the other hand, all the washing had made the cotton fabric shrink a bit and fit tighter. Since she was a child, she'd taken dance lessons from Summer Hill's ballet, jazz, tap, and every kick she'd ever done shown. While it was true that he looked glorious in his little shorts, Olivia knew that in her snug dress, she was a match for him. Uncle Freddie and Mr. Gates were looking at her in an encouraging way. They meant for her to get the tomatoes. The fact that in the 3 days she'd been there, she never once stepped foot in the big garden seemed to mean nothing. Olivia set the bowl on the kitchen counter and picked up the pretty basket the children used for gathering eggs. Props were important. She went to the door, then paused and looked back at the old men. They nodded to her. Olivia straightened her shoulders and went outside. She did not look at the young man with the 2 laughing children. He was holding them with his long, muscular arms and washing their faces. Since Olivia had been there, no one had been able to catch them to wash them. With her head high and her posture showing every second of her years of ballet, Olivia entered the vegetable garden. She was acutely aware that behind her the noise had stopped. The kids weren't screaming in excited protest at having weeks of dirt removed from their smelly, sweaty little bodies. She knew the young man was watching her, assessing her in the way she had him. As though she were playing a part, she sauntered into the garden and rather prettily skipped over a large cabbage plant. She saw that the tomatoes had nearly broken the vines. With her hands in classic ballet pose, she pulled off a few and put them in the basket. Hey, Livy yelled, that basket is for the eggs. Olivia took a breath. It was time to face him. Turning, she looked at them. The young man, almost naked, had a child under each arm, and he was staring at Olivia as though he'd never seen anything like her in his life. Only through years of acting lessons was she able to conceal her emotions. She had to put her feet in a ballet position to keep from swaying towards him. Perhaps, she said slowly, you could find another basket that I could use for produce. What kind of juice? Ace asked. He was tucked under the man's arm like a sack of flour. Whatever you want, Olivia said with an adoring smile. Finally, she looked up at the young man. I have to get this under control, she told herself. Are you the boy who was hired to help around the estate? Her voice was as adult as she could make it. Kit nodded but didn't speak. Perhaps you could tie up the tomatoes? Again, he nodded in silence. Olivia gave him her best smile. Good. Luncheon will be in 20 minutes. I'll call you. She swept past him with all the dignity she could muster. Uncle Freddie and Mr. Gates were in the doorway and she nearly tripped over the wheelchair. Behind them, the deep skillet was smoking and it looked like the fire had gone out under the other one. You two are going to die of gas inhalation. Get the window open. Did you turn the chicken? Why haven't you finished those potatoes? She threw open the refrigerator door. Where are the lemons I brought yesterday? Ace, Uncle Freddie began. Olivia put up her hand. Don't tell me. Something to do with space demons. She looked at Mr. Gates. This afternoon, I'm going to give you a list and you're going to the grocery. Yes, ma'am, Mr. Gates said in exaggerated meekness. Cut it out, she snapped, and in a flurry of energy, she went back to work. It was nearly an hour before she covered the old table with a feast. Fried chicken, sliced tomatoes, sauteed zucchini and onions, mashed potatoes, carrots simmered in orange juice. Thanks to an instant vanilla mix, she even managed to make a bowl of banana pudding. She told Uncle Freddie to call them in. The children, with shiny, clean faces, came into the kitchen with a look of wonder. The smells, the heat, the abundance dazzled them. Behind them, wearing a blue cotton shirt and full khaki trousers, his hair still damp, was the young man. He had his head down as though asking permission to enter. The kids jumped onto the bench and reached for the platter of chicken, but Mr. Gates stopped them. You know we always ask for blessings first. Ace started to say something to that, but Uncle Freddie's glare made him close his mouth. Kit, Uncle Freddie said as he motioned to the chair, did you meet Olivia? Kit took the seat, but as before, he just nodded and didn't speak. After the blessings, Olivia finished putting things on the table and sat down with them. She was seated across the boy, and she couldn't help sneaking glances. Up close, he was extraordinary. He hadn't shaved, so there was whisker stubbled on his cheeks and upper lip. His hair was longer than the men she knew, but, she corrected herself, it was longer than the high school boys she saw around town. Was he an aficionado of the Beatles? She took a small piece of chicken, shades of Scarlett O'Hara, but she didn't want to eat like a filled hand in front of him. The adults were quiet as Letty and Ace told about their latest battle against demons. According to them, this was the Third Army that had chosen Summer Hill, Virginia, to start their war on the world. Yet again, Mr. Gates told them to stay out of Taddington Cemetery. As he nearly always did, he said how he was going to clean up the place very soon. When everyone stopped talking, Olivia looked up. The two men and the children were looking at the tall boy whose head was bent over his plate. He had a healthy appetite. At first, Olivia didn't know what they were waiting for, but he looked up at Mr. Gates and gave a silent nod. He seemed to be saying that yes, he would take care of the cemetery. Olivia couldn't help frowning. Did the boy know how to talk? She could understand that he was shy. After all, he hadn't lived long enough to learn too much about the world, but even so, he should make an effort to try to speak in the company of adults. When he silently looked back down at his plate, Olivia had a surge of feeling. Well, something like being a missionary. She'd help this shy young man get over his fear of strangers, help him learn how to act like a grown-up man. He lifted his head. For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. What she saw was far away from being shy. She saw heat. She saw fire. He gave her a look like other men had tried to, but couldn't quite pull off. His look was not that of a boy. His eyes were that of a man, full grown, and took a breath. Experienced. This was no fumbling virgin of a boy who Olivia was going to teach anything. He knows, she thought. Damn him to hell and back, but he knows. For a minute, a film played in her mind, him mostly naked. Had he done that because he knew a young woman was nearby and probably watching? Ace had helped Mr. Gates when Kit arrived in the wee hours. Olivia wouldn't put it past the child to open her bedroom door and show her off to the newcomer, sort of like exhibiting a prize pig. Even if he hadn't seen her, Ace would have told about Livy being there. The child had often said that she looked like a movie star. So this boy, Kit, had peeled off his clothes to show her the goods, the goods and offer, and Olivia had fallen for it. As she remembered how she acted, she could feel blood rise to her face. She very nearly performed Swan Lake in the tomato patch. She almost done a grand jetter over the 3-foot wide squash plant. And he'd seen it all. Worse was that he'd known it was for him, for his viewing pleasures. She leaned back in her chair and glared at the top of his head. Livy, Uncle Freddie asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She didn't take her eyes off of Kit's bent head. She'd always thought of herself as an actress, but today she failed. How had she not immediately realized that a tall kid who looked like him would know all about women? Back in Maine, he probably had a dozen girlfriends, all of them, no doubt wearing flannel and rubber boots. And Yankee that he was, he probably thought Southern girls were easy. She was sure he knew she was looking at him. Letty was asking how they could make shields to protect themselves from the latest invasion of outer space monsters. Mr. Gates looked at Levy. "You know how to make a shield." Olivia didn't answer. Instead, when the young man set his glass of iced tea down, she moved the big platter of chicken just enough that the glass tipped over. The others didn't see what she'd done, so it looked like Kit had spilled his tea. "It wasn't me," Ace yelled. Kit looked at Olivia. This time, his eyes didn't have that know everything look. He seemed to be puzzled, as though asking her why she'd done that. Everyone was looking at Olivia. She was the one who usually jumped up and got a cloth to mop up spills, but she just sat there, her eyes on Kit. "I don't wait on worthless boys," she said with all the insouciance she could muster. For a moment, everyone froze, stunned by Livy's rudeness. The tea ran off the side of the table and dripped onto the floor. Slowly acting like he was ancient, Mr. Gates started to get up to get a cloth. But Kit unfolded his long body, got a towel off the rack, and wiped up the spill. The whole episode had shocked the children into silence. Again, they expected to be sent away. After Kit cleaned up the table and the floor, he neatly folded the towel and left the house, the door closing softly behind him. The others turned to Livy as though asking for an explanation, but she didn't give one. She stood up and cheerfully said, "Is everyone finished?" She smiled sweetly at the children. "After lunch, why don't we go out to the big magnolia tree and I'll make you a couple of shields. Anybody want some banana pudding?" Letty and Ace stared at her, eyes wide, barely able to nod yes to all of it. Mr. Gates looked across the table at Uncle Freddie. Both of them had twinkling eyes. They lived in the same house for many years and they knew what the other was thinking. This was a time for extortion. "The boy sure can work," Mr. Gates said. "Best worker I ever saw," Uncle Freddie said. "I'll bet he has a cemetery spick I bet he has the cemetery spick and span by nightfall. Livy, a bowl of pudding in her hands, looked at them. It was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. What was their point? Mr. Gates smiled at her. So, Livy, what kind of soup are we having for supper tonight? Maybe I should go into Richmond to a restaurant supply store and buy cans of Campbell's by the case. Olivia's lips tightened. No need to do that, Uncle Freddie said, his voice exaggeratedly loud. Olivia's going to work in a dress shop. No, Letty said. Who'll make our shields? When Ace's lower lip began to quiver, Olivia was reminded of what the child was about to face. He knew his mother was very ill, and Olivia's face looked stormy. She was not a cook. She was a woman with a great career ahead of her. She wasn't one of those earth mothers who naturally envelope children. She wasn't. She let out her breath and glared at Uncle Freddie. You're going to pay someone else to clean this house. I'm not going to do it, and there's too much laundry for me to do. She turned to Mr. Gates. You are in charge of errands. The two old men nodded. A bargain had been struck. What do we do, Livy? Ace asked. Eggs, and no more rolling them down the ramp. And you're going to help me clean up that garden. And get tiger plants? Ace asked. It took her a moment to figure that one out. Zucchini equals zoo equals tiger. Right, tiger plants. She went to the back door. The four of you can clean this up. I have to go see Nina. My mom? Letty looked worried. I didn't break that lamp. It just fell. I was 1,000,000 feet away from it, in the garage. Olivia shook her head. I'll deal with that later. Your mother has a cookbook I want to borrow. She looked at the men. Julia Childs, mastering the art of French cooking. She left the house. What's that? Letty asked. Heaven, Mr. Gates said. Pure heaven on earth. Who wants some banana pudding? Boof, booga something. Uncle Freddie whispered as though it was sacred. It was a sacred phrase. Did I ever tell you about the time I was in Paris? Mr. Gates had heard the story dozens of times, but he said no, that he missed that one. Each of them was smiling as they finished their second lunch and listened to Uncle Freddie's story of a meal he'd had in Paris when he was a young man. They were all glad Livy was staying. For all that she complained and was often grumpy, there was something about the way she shot out orders that gave life to all of them. But best of all, she made things happen. That's the end of chapter 14. That was a whole lot of. Oh boy. I guess this information we need to have going forward. So, to go forward. Basically, I'm saying I don't have anything to say about it. But there was one word, so stay tuned for the definition portion. I shall see you there. Okay, welcome back to the definition portion. The word is spelled INSOUCIANCE, and this is how it is pronounced.
Insouciance.
Insouciance. I know I didn't say that. It's a noun. Casual lack of concern, indifference. Okay, let's find it in the chapter. Okay, it says everyone was looking at Olivia. She was the one, who usually jumped up and got a cloth to mop up spills. But she just sat there, her eyes on Kit. I don't wait on worthless boys, she said with all the
insouciance
she could muster. Okay, it makes sense. Okay, well, like I said, I don't have much to say about this chapter. I guess it's information we need to know going forward in the other chapters. So that's the end of the chapter 14 and the end of the definition video. I shall see you in the next chapter. Bye for now.